She was a world-famous violinist, adored by millions, until a life-altering surgery stole her voice, and with it, her identity. Ariella Knox vanished from the spotlight, choosing silence over a broken melody, until a quiet doctor with a forgotten past helped her find the music within herself again. Their journey isn't about fame, it's about healing, love, and the power of being truly seen. You won't believe how their story ends. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more powerful tales of redemption and hope. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the sold-out concert hall in Tokyo. Ariella Knox stood center stage, her signature black silk gown shimmering like liquid ink beneath the glow of the spotlight. The audience held its breath as she raised her bow to the strings of her century-old violin, the same instrument that had taken her from a crumbling tenement in Detroit to the grandest stages in the world. She drew the first note, a haunting, delicate tone that usually silenced rooms and melted hearts. But tonight, something was wrong. A barely perceptible tremor ran through her wrist. The bow scraped a fraction too hard against the string. To most, it was nothing. But to Ariella, it was a rupture in the perfect world she had built from sound. She kept going, forcing herself through muscle memory, each note a mask for the storm inside her. Her hands, always so sure, were sweating. The tightness in her jaw pulsed with each crescendo. The audience roared with standing ovations at the end, throwing roses onto the stage, shouting her name like a hymn. She bowed, smiled, even blew a kiss. But as soon as she crossed the curtain line, her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the velvet couch in her dressing room, heart pounding, her throat burning, her right hand twitching uncontrollably. For weeks, the symptoms had been escalating, subtle at first, a numbness in her fingers, a dull ringing in her ears, a tremor she blamed on jet lag. Her manager, Elijah Marsh, told her to push through. "You're booked solid through December, Ari. No one wants a broken prodigy." Her assistant whispered concerns, her therapist offered stress relief oils, but none of it quieted the gnawing fear. Deep down, she knew this wasn't exhaustion. Something inside her was giving out. She booked the appointment in secret, using a pseudonym. The clinic in Seattle was small, discreet, and known for its silence as much as its skill. Dr. Nathan Cole met her with calm, clear eyes and a professionalism that almost unnerved her. He didn't gush, didn't mention her Grammys or her Vogue cover. He simply nodded, reviewed her scans, and said, "Let's take a look." Minutes later, after a series of balance and coordination tests, he rolled his stool toward her and showed her the MRI. "There's an acoustic neuroma," he said quietly, pointing to a small white mass pressing against her auditory nerve. "It's benign, but it explains the tremors, the tinnitus, the coordination issues." Ariella blinked, stared at the ghostly image on the screen. "Surgery?" she asked, her voice as brittle as the feeling in her fingers. "Yes," he replied, his tone honest but gentle. "We can remove it. But even with the best neurosurgical precision, there are risks. You could lose part of your hearing. Your fine motor control could be affected." She nodded slowly, but her mind had already gone quiet. She thanked him politely, left the clinic without another word, and sat in her rental car for nearly an hour in the parking lot. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing tethering her to earth. In her mind, one question spun relentlessly. If I can't play, who am I? Ariella Knox wasn't just her name. It was her music. It was the burn in her fingertips after 10 hours of practice. It was the quiet breath before every solo. It was the echo of her parents' laughter when they first heard her play at age 5. Her fame wasn't the thing she feared losing. It was the sound, the communion, the connection. Her voice wasn't her own vocal cords. It was her violin, and if that voice died, did she die with it? That night, she stood in her penthouse suite, looking out at the city skyline. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected her ghost-like silhouette. On the table beside her rested a worn leather case. She opened it slowly, revealing the violin that had followed her through storms and symphonies. She ran her fingers along the wood, tracing every dent, every scratch, like reading a story in Braille. Lifting it to her chin, she tried to play the opening bars of the piece she'd just butchered in Tokyo. The first note came out weak, warbled. Her bow slipped, her fingers fumbled. She stopped, the silence crashing down around her like glass. She laid the instrument down, pressed a fist to her lips, and for the first time in years, let the tears come. No cameras, no encores, no one watching. Just a woman alone, staring down the barrel of a future she couldn't recognize. The operating room was a world of sterile white and humming machines. Ariella lay motionless, eyes closed, a paper-thin hospital gown covering the body that had once graced the covers of classical music magazines, red carpets, and world stages. Her arms were outstretched like wings, electrodes mapping her vitals, while a soft green sheet shielded her from the surgical field. Dr. Nathan Cole stood behind the glass of the observation deck for one last check before scrubbing in. He glanced at her chart. Age 33, no prior surgeries, no known allergies, famous, but fragile in ways the world hadn't seen. The procedure began at 7:04 a.m. Hours slipped by under the steady hands of the surgical team, the clock ticking in a rhythm almost musical. When the final suture was tied and the tumor removed without incident, Nathan gave a quiet nod. It was a success. But as they wheeled her into recovery, he couldn't shake a strange tightness in his chest, like something vital had shifted, like the music wasn't over, just pausing. Ariella woke to a room awash in afternoon light. The scent of antiseptic lingered thick in the air. Her throat was raw, her head heavy, and a bandage hugged the base of her skull. A nurse greeted her with practiced cheerfulness, telling her the surgery had gone smoothly. Ariella blinked in acknowledgement but didn't speak. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Not from pain. From something deeper, like the words were locked away behind a wall she couldn't yet scale. The next day brought no change. The nurse brought her a tray of soft foods and a small dry erase board in case she wished to write. She didn't. She simply stared out the window, watching a tree sway in the wind like it was dancing to a song only she could hear. Visitors were restricted. Her team, Elijah included, had tried calling, but she instructed the front desk to block all outside contact. She didn't want to be the story. She wanted to be no one. Dr. Nathan Cole entered her room on the third morning post-op. Clipboard in hand, stethoscope around his neck, hair tousled in a way that hinted at long shifts and restless nights. He cleared his throat gently. "Good morning, Miss Knox," he said. She didn't turn. She didn't blink. She just kept her eyes on the sky beyond the window, an unreadable expression softening her features. He stood for a moment, expecting, what exactly? Gratitude? Recognition? She offered neither. "That's okay," he said finally, settling into the chair across from her bed. "I talk enough for both of us." In the days that followed, Nathan stuck to a quiet routine: check her vitals, inspect the surgical site, recommend small muscle stimulation exercises. She didn't protest, but she also didn't engage. Still, something in her shifted, almost imperceptibly. She allowed him to adjust her pillow without flinching. She accepted his offered water without hesitation. The wall between them wasn't falling, but it was no longer made of steel. Just fog. By the end of the week, Nathan started bringing music into the room, not through conversation, but through a small Bluetooth speaker. The first track was a surprise, a recording of a lesser-known live performance from Ariella's first album, a piece titled Still Hollow. It was soft, stripped of all studio polish, just her and the strings, each note carrying a fragility that mirrored the way she now sat by the window. Ariella froze when she heard the first note. Her hand twitched, her breath caught. But she didn't cry. She didn't cover her ears or demand it stop. She simply listened, as if testing whether the girl in that recording still existed somewhere inside her. When the track ended, she remained silent. Nathan didn't speak either. He just let the quiet settle, a kind of sacred hush. He kept this up each day. A different track, a different era. Some from her albums, others from obscure live sessions or collaborations she may have forgotten. Ariella's reactions were always subtle. A shift in posture, a deeper breath, a finger tapping unconsciously on the blanket. One afternoon he caught her humming, not out loud but in the movement of her shoulders, like the song was echoing inside her bones. Still, she refused to speak. Nurses whispered about it in the break room. Her mutism wasn't physical, it was intentional. A choice born of fear, of identity shaken, of not knowing what version of herself might answer if she dared open her mouth. Nathan didn't push. He didn't ask. He just kept showing up, his presence steady, patient, quiet. Sometimes he played piano in the rehab lounge down the hall, the notes drifting faintly into her room. She never acknowledged it, but she always opened her window. And for him, that was enough. The storm broke on the fifth night. Rain tapped a restless rhythm against the hospital windows, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if echoing the pulse of something stirring, something unsaid. Ariella sat in her usual place by the window, wrapped in a soft gray blanket, her posture still as a statue carved by longing. On the small table beside her rested the violin Nathan had brought days ago. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even looked at it for more than a glance. It remained there like a silent dare, a relic of a life she wasn't sure she could return to. Nathan stood just outside her door, a speaker cradled in his hand. He hesitated, unsure if tonight would be different. But something in the air, maybe the way the wind whistled through the corridor, or the tired hope in her shoulders, made him press play. A song poured softly into the room. It was a deep cut from her second album, one that had never charted but held a kind of raw magic. The track, Echoes Beneath. It had been recorded in one take, in a smoky studio in Prague, back when Ariella still played barefoot and refused makeup for recordings. Her voice on the track was low, almost whispering, her violin rising around her like smoke in a cathedral. Inside, Ariella turned her head slightly. Her eyes fell on the violin. Her fingers twitched under the blanket. Nathan didn't enter the room, he just waited, heart held in a breath. After the song faded, silence reclaimed the space like tide over stone. Then, slowly, Ariella reached out. Her hand hovered over the violin case before retreating. She tried again, this time lifting the lid, revealing the gleaming wood beneath. Her breath caught. She didn't pick it up, but she didn't close the case either. It was enough. The next morning, Nathan found a single note on the tray beside her breakfast. Her handwriting was elegant, looping, controlled. It doesn't sound like me, but maybe it's still music. That afternoon, he brought his old guitar. It wasn't the polished kind you see on stages, but something personal, worn at the edges, with a faded drawing of a phoenix burned into its side. He sat near the foot of her bed and began to strum, soft and unsure, the chords of an old jazz ballad he used to play with his sister. He didn't look at Ariella, didn't wait for her reaction. He played for the room, for the ceiling, for the girl behind the curtain of silence. Then, halfway through the second verse, a sound joined him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clean, but it was unmistakably a violin, tentative, breathy, like a ghost finding form. Ariella was playing. Her eyes were closed, her bow trembling, but she played, following his melody, echoing it like a heartbeat chasing another. Nathan didn't dare stop. Together, they built something imperfect but alive. The music wove between them, neither flawless nor rehearsed, but stitched from shared breath. When it ended, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The moment had spoken for them. From that day on, the violin stayed close to her hands. She didn't always play. Some days she just tuned it, ran her fingers over the strings like checking for a pulse. But the silence that had clung to her like grief began to shift. Not vanish, but bend, crack, show seams of light. Nathan started leaving small slips of sheet music for her, fragments of half-finished melodies. Sometimes she'd return them with new notes scribbled in, corrections, flourishes. Once she drew a small heart beside a revised chord progression. He didn't mention it, but he carried that page in his pocket for the rest of the day. Late one evening, after a session in the rehab lounge where she had managed to play an entire piece without stopping, she remained behind while the staff packed up. Nathan lingered too, seated at the old upright piano tucked against the far wall. Without thinking, he began playing the opening chords of one of her most famous pieces, Silent Flame. But he didn't play it perfectly. He simplified it, slowed it down, made it his own. Ariella stepped behind him, quietly. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She lifted her violin and joined him, letting her bow find his rhythm. Together, they played a version of the song that had never existed before, one full of space, of restraint, of quiet understanding. No audience, no applause, just heart. When the last note faded, Ariella lowered her violin and whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Nathan turned, stunned, not by her voice, but by the look in her eyes. Not fear, not grief, but something else, something beginning. The calm didn't last. Nothing ever does. Not when the world beyond hospital walls hungers for stories it doesn't understand. It began with a whisper. A blurry photograph snapped through the window of the hospital garden. Ariella's profile, unmistakable even in a hoodie and scarf, caught mid-step beside a man whose back was turned. Nathan, a part-time lab tech with a side hustle as an entertainment blogger, posted it online. Just a caption, "Guess who's hiding out at St. Camilla's?" Within hours, the internet exploded. Headlines surged across gossip sites and music tabloids. Ariella Knox in seclusion, health crisis confirmed. Mystery doctor healing the broken star. Her face reappeared on screens everywhere, not for her music, but for her absence. Speculation spiraled into wild theories. A breakdown, a secret baby, a scandal. Reporters showed up outside the hospital, their cameras pointed at the entrance like vultures circling a quiet hill. Nathan was pulled into a meeting with administration. The tone was grave but careful. "We need to protect patient privacy," they said. "This hospital has a reputation. A single breach could cost us." Nathan nodded, jaw tight. "I know," he said. "That's why I won't let anyone near her." When he entered Ariella's room that evening, she was sitting upright in bed, laptop open on her tray. The screen glowed with headlines, her eyes unmoving. She didn't acknowledge him at first. "I didn't know," he said, softly, standing at the threshold like a man afraid to break something already cracked. "I know," she replied, her voice flat, the first word she had offered him in days. But there was no warmth behind it, just resignation. The next morning, she skipped their therapy session. The day after, her violin remained untouched on the windowsill. By the third day, Nathan arrived to find her room empty. Her personal items were gone. No note, no goodbye, just silence. He stood in the doorway, the sun streaming in through the open blinds, casting long shadows across the abandoned bed. On the pillow, folded with care, was the gray blanket she always wrapped around her legs when she played. On the side table, the violin case remained, closed, its surface gleaming faintly. He picked it up, ran his fingers across the strings. It hummed a soft, sad sound in reply, like a heartbeat left behind. She was gone, and though he understood why, understood the weight of fear, of exposure, of having one's most private wounds made spectacle, it didn't make it easier to breathe. Nathan returned to his apartment that night, hollowed out. His place felt smaller than usual, too quiet, too still. The ukulele he once gave her rested on his desk now, unopened since the day she first played it. It stared at him like a memory refusing to fade. He tried to play. He picked up his guitar, let his fingers move across the strings in the shape of the song they'd written together, "Still Me." But each time he strummed, the chords fell apart. The rhythm cracked, the melody dissolved. Music, once his refuge, now sounded like echoes in a room no one else stood in. Days bled into each other. He scanned every blog, every social feed. No sightings, no updates. She had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed her. And still, every time he passed a music shop or heard a violin on the radio, his chest tightened with memory. Not of her fame, not of her face on magazine covers, but of her sitting by the window, bow shaking, eyes half closed, playing music not for an audience, but for herself. Then one evening, just as he climbed the stairs to his apartment with a bag of cold takeout, the doorbell rang. He hesitated, heart thudding. When he opened the door, Clara, the night nurse who had been there from the beginning, stood in the hallway, out of breath, a smile barely tugging at the corners of her lips. She held a small envelope, her fingers cradling it like it was something sacred. "She asked me to give you this," she said simply. Nathan took it, his hands already trembling as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of music paper, no lyrics, just a melody, hand-drawn, tentative, full of breath. At the top, her handwriting read, "Still Me," unfinished but waiting. And below in smaller slanted print, "If you ever want to hear this again, find me where there are no lights, no stage, just heart." Nathan didn't speak. He simply held the page to his chest and closed his eyes. Because now he knew. She hadn't run from him. She had run because of how much she felt. Because the song they started wasn't over yet. The old church-turned-community hall smelled of aged wood and fresh paint, a place where voices echoed longer and dust clung lovingly to the rafters. Folding chairs filled the narrow aisles, mismatched but charming, with hand-painted posters taped to the walls, crayon hearts, music notes, and words like, "Let your voice be heard," scrawled by tiny hands. A banner hung crookedly above the low wooden stage. "Voices of the Heart, First Recital." It fluttered gently every time the wind pushed through the heavy front door that never quite closed right. The room wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. It felt honest. Nathan stood in the back, his guitar case gripped tight, heart pounding in a rhythm that felt both familiar and terrifying. He had followed her words, the melody, the letter, the promise. It led him here, to this quiet town tucked between mountains and mist, where the only stage was a wooden platform and the spotlight was sunlight spilling through stained glass windows. Children performed first. Some sang lullabies, others clapped out rhythms with shy pride. The audience clapped not out of politeness, but out of deep, unfiltered joy. An old man with shaking hands read a poem he'd scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. A woman in her 60s recited lyrics from memory, her voice trembling but strong. Every sound mattered here. Every note was sacred. And then he saw her. She was half hidden behind the stage curtain, crouched beside a small girl adjusting a microphone. Ariella's hair was pulled back in a loose knot, a navy blue sweater draped over her shoulders, jeans tucked into scuffed boots. No makeup, no pretense, just her. She smiled at the child and gave a thumbs up, laughing softly when the girl responded with a proud little bow. That laugh, it hit Nathan like sunlight through a long closed window. The host stepped forward. "And now," she announced, "we'd like to welcome a special musical guest." Nathan knew. He walked down the aisle, every step in sync with the quiet thump in his chest. He climbed onto the stage, settled onto the stool, and pulled his guitar onto his lap. The light above flickered, not for drama, just faulty wiring, and he strummed the opening chords of Still Me. The room quieted. No phones, no flashes, just listening. Halfway through the verse, she stepped out. Ariella moved like the stage itself remembered her. Barefoot, calm, her face held none of the polished serenity of her former life. This was different. She wasn't performing. She was arriving. She reached the second mic and closed her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was not perfect. It cracked, it swayed, but it was real. It carried everything. Loss, healing, fear, hope. Even when the lights fade out, I'm still me, and you still see. No one breathed. Not until the last note floated into the beams above them like a whispered vow. And then the applause broke, raw, loud, grateful. People rose to their feet, tears in their eyes, not for the star who once was, but for the woman who dared to begin again. Nathan set his guitar down and walked to her. He took both her hands in his, leaned close until their foreheads nearly touched, and whispered, "You don't need the applause to be you. You just need to believe I'll always hear your heart." This time, she did believe him. It showed in the way her shoulders eased, in the way her fingers tightened gently around his. No fear. Just warmth. Just trust. 1 year later, Ariella Knox was no longer on billboards or magazine covers. She had traded stadiums for school gyms, glossy interviews for music shared in firefly-lit parks, and quiet hospital wings. She and Nathan released a 5-song EP titled Whispered Light, recorded in a friend's barn with the windows open to let the breeze in. The songs weren't perfect, but they were true. Each one born from silence, strung together by hands that had once been too afraid to reach. They toured unconventionally, nursing homes, shelters, cancer wards, places where music wasn't consumed but felt, where a single note could be medicine. Nathan played guitar. Ariella sang, sometimes faltering, always sincere. Her voice was different now, but it was hers. And people listened, really listened, because the songs didn't beg for attention. They invited presence. One crisp autumn evening, they stood on a dock by a lake where a small community had gathered. Children wrapped in blankets sat cross-legged on the wooden boards. Lanterns swayed in the trees. When their final song faded, Ariella turned to thank the crowd. But Nathan was already kneeling beside her. He held a small wooden box, carved with their initials and the shape of a violin. "Ariella," he said, voice low but steady, "I don't want to be your stage or your spotlight. I just want to walk beside you, wherever the next verse goes." She looked at him, her heart pounding but unafraid. Around them, fireflies blinked like notes on invisible staff lines. She knelt beside him, rested her forehead to his, and whispered, "You didn't save my voice. You gave me a reason to use it again, even when no one was listening." They kissed as the lanterns swayed, and the last note of Still Me floated out across the water, soft and golden, like something reborn. Sometimes, the most powerful transformations happen not under the spotlight, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Ariella's journey reminds us that identity isn't defined by fame, applause, or perfection. It's found in the courage to begin again when everything you thought made you you is stripped away. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was protection, healing, and reflection. And when she found the strength to break that silence, it wasn't for a stage or an audience. It was for herself. Nathan didn't try to fix her. He listened. He waited. He showed up when it would have been easier to walk away. And in that gentle, steady presence, she rediscovered her voice. Not the polished one the world demanded, but the one that told her truth. We all face moments where we question our worth, our path, our purpose. But this story teaches us that even broken melodies can become beautiful again when played with honesty, patience, and love. So, if you're going through your own season of silence or struggle, remember, your story isn't over. The quiet between the notes is still part of the music. And sometimes it's in those quiet spaces that the most meaningful songs are born. Thank you for listening to Ariella and Nathan's story. We'd love to know, where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, please don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. We share tales that heal, uplift, and remind us all that hope often begins in the quiet.